everyone. Welcome to the Zone to Speak podcast. I'm your host, Juliana. Hi, everyone. At Zone to Speak, I know how important it is to stay healthy, strong, and ready for every ride, workout, and adventure. That's why I have got exclusive discounts on some of my favorite products designed specifically for athletes like you. Psych Plus. Their smart pump is a game changer, compact, efficient, reliable, and perfect for keeping your tires road and gravel ready. Plus, they have radar tail lights, smart trainers, smart fans, and more. Get 10% off the smart pump and 5% off everything else. 35% off Frey Skincare. Skincare made for athletes, designed for skin that sweats. Their all-natural, vegan, and cruelty-free products keep your skin protected and fresh. I have been using Frey for years, and I love it. 10% off Cold Age. Premium vitamins and supplements to fuel your body, speed up recovery, and help you ride longer. I personally take the Women's Fermented Vitamin and Creatine, both powder and capsules. 10% Clearly Not Coffee, the ultimate coffee alternative made from functional ingredients to fuel your focus and energy without the caffeine crash. Try it out. 15% off Omri supplements. Whether you are training, recovering, or pushing for peak performance, their high-quality supplements have you covered. And there's something special from me, your host. As a certified integrative health nutrition expert and holistic life coach, I am thrilled to offer all my listeners 25% off personalized nutrition and life coaching with Genki Wellness. If you want to optimize your health or simply feel your best, head to bemoregenki.com and use the code ZONE2SPEAK. For all the discounts, check the episode description for the links and use Zone2Speak code at checkout. And let these amazing products support your health and performance. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Zone to Speak. Today, I am joined by none other than Josh Brandwene, the mind behind Climb with Josh. Josh is a cycling coach with a deep passion for helping riders improve their climbing skills, build sustained power, and conquer the toughest ascents with confidence. With years of experience as an endurance athlete and coach, Josh has guided cyclists through the challenges of climbing, both physically and mentally. Whether it is preparing for a tough Grand Fondo, tackling the Pyrenees, or simply improving efficiency on long climbs, his coaching philosophy focuses on a well-rounded approach to performance. In this episode, I will dive into the art and science of climbing, explore key training principles, and get insider tips on how to handle those relentless uphill battles. Plus, we'll talk about his guided cycling trips in the Pyrenees and the experiences can transform a cyclist's ability. If you want to become a strong climber, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks so much, Juliana. Great to be here.
And sorry, I meant to ask you how to pronounce your last name. I hope I didn't butcher it.
You actually nailed it, and it's not an easy one to nail, so well done.
Wow. I'm proud. So tell me, how did you get into this sport, and especially on the niche of how, to become a cycling coach specializing in climbing?
No, it's a great question. So I, for many years, was an age group half marathoner. And I love endurance. I love the science behind the training, everything, the planning, the preparation, laying out your training plan, course reconnaissance, the whole 9 yards. And I did that for a bunch of years. I was probably doing, no more than 2 half marathons a year. And then as I got a little bit older, down into 1. And then my hip and back more or less basically said, you're all done with running, pal. And I had dealt with, back spasms, lower back joint issues, things of that nature. And it was one Christmas, all I did was bend down to tie my shoes. And I literally spent the whole Christmas holiday immobile. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, this is wonderful for me, but it's terrible for me. It's just not suiting me. And I'm not anti-running at all, but I just could not enjoy it and stay healthy enough to do it. And I dabbled a little bit with cycling throughout the years. And our daughter is a elite university level triathlete. So she's actually the original cyclist in the family. And so I just made the decision. I love endurance. I love endurance training. It's time. So I made the switch to cycling, and like so many people, I just fell in love with it. I found it even more enjoyable than running, much easier on the body. When you eliminate that hip extension and the pounding from running, I discovered I could train more days a week. I could train longer. I could train harder. And I really just fell in love with everything about it, from the bike technology. I mean, who doesn't love shopping for bikes, and who doesn't love shopping for cycling kit? There's just so much that goes into it. So I went all in, and I found that I could train for events that were even longer in duration. And I loved everything about it. So a couple years into my cycling journey, my degree is in kinesiology, so I have the background for it. I had been many years ago, high school age cross-country running coach, and I decided I really wanted to apply those skills in cycling. So I got my coaching license. I started working with folks. My initial, and still to a degree ongoing, area is endurance. So if someone needs a coach to train them for crits or for sprinting, I am not their guy. That is not my specialty. I'm going to certainly recommend them to other people. I know my lane. And then my journey to climbing, I think, is a relatable one. There are certainly riders who have the physical characteristics. They're sort of born climbers. I don't resent them at all. I tip my hat, and I think it's amazing what they can do, not only with their effort and their training, but based on their physiology and their DNA and their makeup. That's not me. I'm like the every person. We've walked miles in each other's shoes. So I still remember the first 6 months that I rode, I was deathly afraid of climbing. As a runner, in order to stay healthy, I didn't do much in the way of any courses that had elevation because my Achilles and my feet just didn't hold up to it well. So I was running on the flats. Transitioning to cycling was new enough. I didn't really feel comfortable climbing. And my initial thought, and I think a lot of people go through this, is that's not for me. I can't do that. And I think it's funny, I joke, but this is true. I think I spent the first 4 months, whenever I was doing indoor rides on Zwift, I never left Tempest Fugit. I stayed on the flats, even on Zwift. And I was very fortunate to really be exposed to some really welcoming, and the cycling community, it's just so welcoming, and the whole endurance sport community is.
Yeah.
And I got introduced to climbing, and lo and behold, here I am these years later. And I just have a passion for both the science and the art of climbing. So that's a little bit about my background.
So you conquered the fear, and went above and beyond. It's one of your passions, I guess, because you're coaching climbing, and you have, we'll talk a little bit more later on your camping trips in the Pyrenees, which is all climbing.
It is. So some other parts of the climbing piece, and I have some. Social media has turned out to be an amazing gift when it comes to the endurance sport and the cycling community, because the two things that sort of got me, no pun intended, over the hump with embracing climbing were the original group that I still ride with here in my hometown in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, the Lidditz crew. These guys are just so welcoming, so genuine, and just being out with them, I didn't have a choice on what route we were doing. So you go where they're going, and you learn that, at least even initially, all right, this is tough, this is hard, but it's something that I can embrace, and it's something that I can do. Even with we have some elevation around here, nothing that compares to the Pyrenees. So that was one experience. Two, I was very fortunate with a couple of the the gentleman that I connected with on Instagram from England, Lou Roberts and Aid Murphy, still close friends with them on Instagram. I got invited to a Zwift ride over the Christmas holiday one year to go up Alpe de Zwift. And it
Wow.
was one of those things where I'm like, all right, these are mates. I don't want to say no to them. I've never done something like this before, but I hopped in, and really that was the moment. And I give them so much credit for, pushing me to do that these years ago. That I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. This is a really unique challenge. So over the course of time, in just combining the science that goes into not just the basics of cycling and the basics of endurance cycling, but also the characteristics that go into becoming a better climber, they fascinate me. And I'm even to this day still learning. There's always something new to learn about the experience of climbing. You've got short climbs, you've got longer climbs with less gradient, you've got sort of climbs that are very even in their elevation, that is very different than climbs that have, a variation and ramps and false flats and even little sections of downhills. It's all different, both from a training standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, a pacing standpoint, and also honoring and celebrating the different physical characteristics we all have that are going to suit us towards certain styles of climbing. And I just, there's nothing I don't love about it. And that's even before we talk about the natural beauty of being up in the mountains, which at the end of the day is the most important thing.
I was going to say that, not just the natural beauty, being nature, but also when you get to the top is such a wonderful accomplishment, a feeling of accomplishment.
It is. As I've just put my website together. It's very basic, but one of the things I talk about is, and I truly believe this, climbing is that combination of art and science. And while it seems cliche, it is to a certain degree poetry, because you have to write your own verse with it. And one of the trapdoors of social media is the world of social comparison. And well, this person's doing this and this person's doing this. And I'm no comm hunter. I am not going to be the person in the top 5, 10% of a leaderboard overall on any of the climbs, even in my own age group. I'm not going to be the crown wearer, and I'm okay with that. It's me against me. It's me against the mountain. And it's so important for everyone to approach it that way. That allows for you to experience joy when you get to the summit, as opposed to where did I finish on the leaderboard compared to everybody else, because we can't compare ourselves to each other.
100% agree. I'm a wellness coach as well, and I talk a lot about that, of mental strategies, comparing yourself. I mean, you can compare to a limit, maybe for inspiration and motivation, but not to put yourself down. I think, look what we are doing. You're getting on a bike. You're already winning. You're climbing a mountain. You're winning. Look at your body's doing. And instead of comparing yourself where you're falling into the performance, and, just compare your own performance. How are you progressing, or if you're reaching a plateau? And so talking about that, what are the differences of training for climbs, then, like you said, you're not a crit coach, for example. So what would be the difference? Because I remember once I used to do triathlons, and then I was doing the Nice Ironman, which is very hilly. I think it's the hilliest of them all, over 2,000 meters climb in 90 kilometers. It was the 70.3 distance. And I was living in Dubai. It's pretty much flat, but we had like one little overpass or something. And my coach was like making me go back and forth.
Right.
And some people are like, no, that's not what you do. Like, I don't know what to do. Well, so what's the big difference in training for climb?
Well, believe it or not, I'm going to start with the similarities, because there are some foundational basics that matter for all of us as cyclists, regardless of the terrain, regardless of the distance. in differing levels of importance, but they're all important. And the first one, and I honor the name of your podcast, comes down to zone 2. It does. And we as a coaching body do a good job of following the science as it relates to zone 2 in its proper proportion, whether that's 80% of your time in zone 2, going along with make your easy days easy, make your hard days hard. We do a really good job of that. But the next level is helping folks truly understand the why behind zone 2, because understanding the why helps with motivation and a certain amount of badge of honor that once you understand the why, that comes along with, this is why I'm doing this much volume at that level. So when you're done with a session or you're done with a period of time where it's almost exclusively zone 2, you have that sense of accomplishment, because we've all had the experience of doing a zone 2 workout where we get done and we're like, did I push myself hard enough?
Yeah.
And it can leave you, if you don't understand the why, feeling unfulfilled. And so understanding what we're doing metabolically to improve ourselves as cyclists in zone 2 really matters. And it comes down to metabolics and the difference between slow twitch fibers and their use and fast twitch fibers and their use. So I won't break out the charts and graphs. I'm not going to do a crazy deep dive into the science. I will stick to the basics. But when we are on an easy ride, whether that's call it a zone 2 ride, call it a coffee ride, call it party pace, call it whatever you want, we are almost exclusively using our slow twitch fibers. And it's that feeling you get where you know you can keep going for a long period of time. Maybe your breathing rate is just slightly difficult, but you can hold a conversation. Whereas when we get up like high into tempo and then into threshold and any kind of either sustained maximum effort or a max power effort where we're breathing so hard like we can't even talk, we're using all of our concentrative powers just to stay focused on the road, that's different. So when we are using the high-end efforts, that's fast twitch fibers. Our fast twitch fibers, and we've all know what this experience feels like, that's when our legs start burning. And that's the production of lactic acid. Fast twitch fibers don't clear lactate. Okay. They work hard, they produce lactate. It is only our slow twitch fibers that clear the lactate. So in order to become a better, well-rounded cyclist and someone who can handle an extended climb, and the definition of an extended climb can vary from person to person and from gradient to gradient. But in order to be able to handle an extended climb, naturally, no matter how much you try to pace yourself, you're fighting against gravity. You might be fighting crosswinds and headwinds and road conditions to go along with it. We're going to have to produce power at some point, and we're going to create lactate. When the lactate builds, it must be used as a secondary fuel source, and then it has to be cleared. Only a well-developed set of slow twitch fibers can do that. And those slow twitch fibers only experience the training effect when we are at what we refer to as zone 2. As soon as you start putting out, and this is a little bit oversimplified, but as soon as you start putting out too much power, too much effort, too high a breathing rate, too high a heart rate, yeah, you're using those zone 2 fibers, but you're not growing them. So they need to be grown and they need to become more efficient. And we can get into, and I won't get into it, but we can talk about terms like mitochondrial function and all these other things that truly they matter. If we don't do that, we're not setting ourselves up for success. And so the most important thing is to develop that massive lactate clearing capacity. And that's what zone 2 training does. And when a rider understands that, they at least are able to take the leap of faith that work is making a difference. It doesn't happen after one session, doesn't happen after 1 week, doesn't even happen after 1 month. It's week over week, month over month, even year over year on training cycle to make your lactate clearing capacity as efficient as possible. So that is, at its core, got to have that if you're going to climb. It doesn't matter how strong you are. You can do all the strength training you want. If you can't clear the lactate that's going to build up, yeah, you might get to the top, but you are going to suffer mightily. And it's going to hurt anyway, but it won't be type 2 fun. It won't necessarily be fun. So that's an important part of it. The second important part of it is sustained power training. We get so caught up with FTP. FTP is merely a guide to the creation of training zones. It is not the be-all, end-all. It's only apples to apples relevance would be is if you were literally training for somewhere in the neighborhood of a 60-minute time trial under pretty pristine conditions because you want to be putting out a power that's about what you can handle for about that hour. Climbs are going to vary in length. Some climbs will be much shorter than an hour. Some climbs are going to be much longer than an hour. You get to the Tourmalet, you get to the Col de Fortet, you get to climbs in some other regions of the world, you're going longer than an hour. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it comes down to the appropriate amount of training per week with sustained power outputs. And sustain, I consider sort of a range of that to be anywhere of like intervals between as low as 3 minutes all the way up to 15, 20 minutes. Obviously, you don't want to get much past 20 minutes. You're tearing yourself down for no reason. So train low, train high, make sure that you provide adequate amount of recovery into your week of training. And these are things that do matter for endurance training, even as much as they matter for climbing training. So there are a lot of similarities that go into the two. Some of the things that will matter are finding time to climb, whether that's indoor and or outdoor. Obviously, outdoor gives you the whole experience because you're fighting gravity and everything else that goes along with getting prepared for a trip in the mountains or whatever it is you want to accomplish. Even if you live somewhere that's flat and you don't have access, it won't be quite apples to apples, but indoor climbing training does make a difference. There's nothing wrong with structured training in erg mode in a broad sense. I use it plenty with my athletes that I work with. But if you're specifically training for climbing at some point, at some phase, we are going to cut you loose in free mode and you're going to do some climbing, whether you're on Zwift, whether you're on Ruvi. There are places that will create elevation because then you are fighting against resistance in a non-erg setting, which creates an environment as similar as possible to the outdoor climbing. So that is one of the significant differences in the just sort of overall training and the specificity of climbing.
And no, this is great information. Yeah, now I live in Girona, so I can do a lot of climbing outdoors, and I do feel the difference. But when I lived, in flat places, I lived in Miami, New York, Dubai, then I did a lot of indoors, and I think it does make a difference. I am a big fan of structured training, especially when you're on the road. Sometimes you don't know what can happen, or red lights and things like that. It gets on the way. But what's your take on cadence versus power when climbing? What should riders focus on? Spinning faster or push bigger gears? I'm a spinner. I'm a big spinner. My husband's always telling me like, one more gear. And I'm like, no pain.
It is such an important question that you ask. It is an incredibly hotly debated topic. And my approach to it is it's got to be tailored to the individual as long as it is not on either extreme. I am not a believer in demanding a certain cadence from any rider. There are plug and play structured training sessions on platforms that will remain nameless that like bark at you. You need to be riding at cadence X or cadence Y. No, it is a pathway to madness because we are all physiologically different. And a lot of that has to come down to a individual's balance of slow twitch versus fast twitch fibers. Nobody's all one or the other, but we do have massive physiological differences between us. And as a result of that, for me to tell a rider, you must ride at this cadence or you have to increase your cadence, I am quite potentially doing them a disservice. Again, as long as it's not on the extreme. Yes, of course, especially with climbing, you could be grinding way too big a gear and have your cadence way too low, way too much stress on your tendons, taxing yourself far too much muscularly. And on the other end, you could literally be spinning at such a ridiculously high cadence that you're putting stress on your hip flexors, you're bouncing up and down in the saddle, you're being inefficient. So nobody should be operating on either of those extremes, but everybody's sweet spot's going to be different. I'm like you. I'm a high cadence rider. That's what works for me. If I drop the cadence too much, I am going to suffer. So I'll give you an example. Like when I arrived in the Pyrenees last September, I flew from the States through Heathrow to Toulouse. I made it to Toulouse. My bike decided to stay at Heathrow for a couple days.
No.
So luckily, I came well enough in advance, which I always do. Our guests were not arriving for 3 days, but I don't want to sit in the mountains and not ride. So my partner on the ground, Richie Barnes, the property owner who I partner with and work with on the logistics and everything else, got me to bike hire. I got a wonderful carbon road bike to climb with, but the rear cassette was different. And I'm an 1134 guy in the back. I need the 34. It makes a difference for me because I'm a higher cadence rider. So I had an 1130. It's not terrible. And so I went up to Col d'Aspin. I went up to Parasourd with the 1130. And not like I couldn't make it in a reasonably efficient time, but there was no way I was going to be at my very most efficient and best on the 1130. I do better with a slightly higher cadence. Nothing crazy. Other riders are going to do better at a slightly lower cadence. And it's something riders need to experiment with. And that's why both climbing indoors and climbing outdoors, to find that sweet spot makes a difference. For me, if I drop it too low, I'm torching myself muscularly. But I work with riders who, if they spin too high, their heart rate soars, their breathing rate soars. For them, it is inefficient. So there's no magic bullet for cadence. It's just stay away from the extremes.
I really like that you said that. It makes me happy because a lot of people are against the spinners. And it's not like I'm spinning and staying at the same place. Like I said, I'm not like on the end of the spectrum. But it's good to know we are different. And the sweet spot, it's dependent on you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great.
Exactly.
And are there any big mistakes that cyclists make when it comes to climbing? And is there anything that can do to fix them?
I would say there are two big, born out of well-intentioned mistakes that climbers make. First is in training and not trusting the science behind the 80-20 rule. 80% of your saddle time zone 2 or less, maximum 20% at high intensity training. We get this, we have such a mentality, more is always better. I think societally, I don't even limit that to just endurance sports or sports in general. It's more is not better. High intensity training breaks you down muscularly, even on a day where you're not super sore outwardly from high intensity training. You are doing metabolic and microscopic damage to yourself. It is a stress that you're putting your body under, and your body is going to respond to that. You don't get stronger on the high intensity day. You get stronger on the recovery and rest days that come after it, because your body heals and adapts and gets stronger. So that's why the high intensity training needs to be limited. Because if you keep hammering it, you're going to make yourself a slower, more injury prone, worse cyclist. It's so important to trust the percentages. To be honest with you, there's a great study they did a couple years ago on, it was a number of riders who finished high up in the GC on the Giro d'Italia. There were riders doing as little as 8 or 9% of their volume at high intensity training. There's data and science to back it up. Trust the science. Make the leap of faith. Make your hard days hard. Make them few and far between. Make your easy days easy. And that's what's going to help you grow as a cyclist. The other one comes from tactically, and it's pacing. We've all made this mistake. And I've made this mistake, because we all have those moments with, even as much as I know better, no, I'm going to overcome it. I feel great today. I'm going to go really hard and I'm going to bank time at the beginning. No, you're not. And this is why the pure just getting over focused on FTP doesn't matter. When it comes to different individual power outputs, and I'm not talking about pure watts, I'm talking about on a relative scale, on what's in and around your threshold, what's in and around the most power you could put out for, let's say, a 1-minute effort or a 5 or a 10-minute effort. It's not linear. We all have different strengths in those areas. And I will quote, and this is the cycling coach that's had the most impact on me professionally, is Dr. Inigo San Millan. And he was Tadej Pogacar's lifelong coach up until very, very recently, even through his first 2 Tour de France victories. Talks about, it's FTP of what? Is it FTP of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it might be? We all know that if we go a little too far on a 5-10 minute effort, we're going to blow up. But that blow up point is different for all of us at different lengths of time. And so I think we've all made the mistake of getting a little too big for our britches and a little too, I'm going to overcome the science, go too hard, and we're either going to find ourselves at best slowing down and making it a slog, a really slow slog and painful one for the rest of the climb, or clipped out, doubled over, catching our breath, trying to get ourselves going sideways and back up the mountain again. And I've done them both. I think we all have.
Been there for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Pacing, it needs to be learned and experimented with. So for anyone who lives in any sort of hilly area at all, sending them out to do some, as long as it's a safe road and a safe environment, some hill repeats where I'm not giving them much instruction. You know how long it is. I want you to push yourself as hard as you think you can, where you have to do 2 more of these, and you're not going slow, but you're not blowing up. And I celebrate when athletes make the mistakes, because when they make the mistakes, they're learning what their limit is.
True.
That's the art poetry piece of this. That is going to be different for all of us, and you can only learn through experimentation. So those are the 2 biggest mistakes I see.
It makes sense. As you said it makes total sense, because been there, done that on all of us. I remember once, I was way back in the day, I was with my brother in the French Alps and we were riding, and I had those moments that I wanted to keep up with him and then just couldn't anymore. I had to stop, unclip, and then the worst part was I realized I couldn't clip and ride up in the middle of the
Yep.
Yeah. But so you're talking about, we are talking about the training. Do you also incorporate essential workouts as well to go along with the cycling training? Would you incorporate some workouts to improve the climbing?
We're talking about strength training specifically?
Or any...
So from a strength training standpoint, if someone asks, I, as a former personal trainer and someone with a kinesiology degree, will give them some basics. And it's really the kinetic chain stuff from legs through the core that are really important. Things like single leg deadlifts. It can be split squats, things of that nature. I'm not going to get into the weeds with it and start recommending squats with a bar in their back. I won't necessarily know enough about somebody's structural spine health to be able to do that. I will recommend that they work with a personal trainer or a physical therapist in their own region in order to do that. My athletes are all over the globe. I work with athletes from England, Scotland, down in Spain, in Canada. So it's a very global population, and I don't want to ever do something that's going to put them in a bad way. But certainly strength training can and should be a part of it, but it's dialed in very specific for cyclists. And so, there's a lot you can do right. There's a lot you can do wrong. And there are even some things you can do that are actually going to make you slower as a cyclist. So it's an area to tread carefully in. In terms of sessions on the bike, obviously we've talked a lot about the Zone 2 sessions, and we try to make those as entertaining as possible. It's not really possible, but we'll at least mix up and change the interval within Zone 2 as much as possible on certain days. It's funny, I do have a particular workout I give my athletes typically only once a month. It's called a heart rate drift ride, where it's literally, it's either 60 or 65% of your quote FTP straight across. And what I'm analyzing is their heart rate, not from a pure standpoint per se, although if it's very different, it matters, but more to see whether or not it's drifting significantly upward. If you see a super upward drift in the heart rate, that is an indication of one of two things. Either they're overtrained and we got to back some training off because they're fatiguing fast, or we really need to focus on mitochondrial development and the Zone 2 stuff. The high intensity stuff really centers around, the typical term is threshold. And that's that effort that is just sort of slightly below what somebody's quote unquote FTP is. If you're doing too much training over FTP, which doesn't say you can't, there's a lot of breakdown that occurs in that. And so especially as it comes to like older cyclists like myself, I'm not sprinting. I don't want to sprint. I don't think a lot of people in my age group do exactly. So there's just, when you're talking about max efforts, that's a horse of a different animal. That's for sprinters. That's for crit races. It's not hugely important. We're talking about sustained effort. So it's sort of growing higher intensity, sustained threshold blocks. And I have a whole progression that goes from threshold 1 all the way up to threshold 15.0. And so it takes you in a progression from multiple really short threshold blocks through lengthening them and then going from a lot of small blocks to fewer bigger blocks all the way up through. And so that's a series that helps people grow over time. That's neither rushing them into overtraining or crushing their spirit either. Anytime an athlete writes back to me, first 2 reps were kind of hard. The last 3 reps were really hard. I barely survived them, like music to my ears. That means we did it right. And so there's a whole progression with that. The other piece, and I give, again, Dr. Inigo San Milan credit for learning this from him, is what's called Zone 4 at the end, because it's a practical application of what you're going to experience. So you do a proper warm-up, a significant, not crazy long, but a significant Zone 2 block. Okay. And then you do a block of threshold at the end.
I like that. It makes sense.
We're not getting on a starting line for a climb and going through a proper warm-up. You've probably ridden for a good 30 minutes at hopefully Zone 2 where you're saving your matchsticks, and then you're on the climb. And so, not all climbs, but so many climbs have a ramp at the end. You're going to have to be able to practically put out a fair amount of power at the end. Perfect example of that is the steepest ramps on the Col de Tourmalet are at the end.
Yeah.
And if you manage your effort level throughout the Col de Tourmalet and your nutrition, which fueling is so important while riding.
It's going to be my next question.
Oh, great. I can't wait. And if you manage your effort and your fueling and you've trained to clear lactate, you'll have the ability to put out some power at the end because it kicks up. And when we were there, not only it kicks up for everybody, the wind started howling in September. It's not the type of weather you'll get during the summer for our upcoming trips, but in late September, we had some fun with the weather, let's say.
Yeah, I bet. So talking about nutrition, what role does nutrition play in preparing for a big climb, for maintaining energy during the long effort?
I'll stick to the basics. I am not a certified nutritionist in any way, shape, or form. I've been very fortunate to learn so much from a number of wonderful sports nutritionists, including we just launched we have 2 sold out weeks in the Pyrenees. I know we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
We just launched a 3rd week, an over 50 week.
Wow.
And it's being co-run by myself and Saskia Kleinert, who specializes in nutrition, and especially nutrition and wellness and flourishing for folks who are cyclists who are a little bit older. So it's hugely important, and I'm grateful to her and everybody else I've learned from. So for me, it comes down to fuel your ride early, fuel it often, nothing new on event day. And by event day, it could be a Grand Fondo. It could be the days you're in the Pyrenees climbing, whatever it might be. You don't want to be experimenting with things that might upset your stomach at that point. But, years and decades ago, the old school was have your water, maybe every now and then have a half a banana or something like that. And that's never been the correct science. And I, once upon a lifetime, was old school too. And I know what it's like to legit bonk. It is something I would never wish on my worst enemy. You feel you're not really going to die, but you feel like you're going to die because you feel so bad. It's not just being depleted. It's not just being underfueled. It's really unhealthy. And so at best, it's really going to hurt your performance. At worst, you're getting picked up by the sag wagon and your day on the mountain is over. And you can't start when it's too late. So for me personally, and everybody has a different, you have to start at this time in your ride. I'm taking a nutrition 20 minutes into every ride. Not force feeding myself or stuffing my yap, but I'm constantly taking it in products that I know work for me and give me energy and do not in the least upset my stomach. And I will keep that going. My brother and I did a Grand Fondo up in Vermont in the United States last summer. And in my longest training ride for it, which I had about 12,000 feet of climbing, I was out for a good 5 hours. I had every bit of 2,500 calories during the day. Liquid calories from bars and things like that, as well as a stop for a Coke and a bag of potato chips. Cannot underestimate the importance of fueling, not only for what it's going to do for you while you're riding, but the difference it makes in recovery the next day. Before I made the transition to modern science with nutrition, after a hard training session, so I'll go back a couple winters indoors, I'd just be wrecked. Terrible sleep, heart rate variability, really terrible, bad recovery, really sore. As soon as I started fueling my rides, I might be fatigued some the next day, you should be, but I felt like I could go again. And if you take care of the fueling, when you're spending 6 days riding in the Pyrenees, you will be able to keep riding. If you're not fueling, not recovering, getting some carbs and some protein in you right after the event, you're just not controlling all your controllables to have a great experience. So fueling is super important.
Yeah. I think I'm always eating when I'm cycling. And I think it's so funny, all those people that say they don't remember to eat and they need to set their biking computer to alert them, which is great that they have that. But for me, I'm like, I don't need a reminder. I'm like, still need to wait another few minutes to eat again.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, there's so much to unpack in climbing. We could be talking here for hours. I want to get into your climbing trips because that's so interesting. And so many people are doing this more and more and more. And I think your trips are so unique, especially the one now that you're doing with the 50 plus group, which I think it's a niche that a lot of people are not catering to. And there are so many 50 plus people that also want to participate on those things without the fear of having so many young people and being dropped or something like that.
Exactly.
I mean, though a lot of the 50 plus are super fit, but so tell me a little bit about the cycling camps you lead in the Pyrenees. And I don't know if there are other areas of the world that you're also doing that.
Stay tuned. There will be other areas of the world. So the whole story behind how this came about, I think, is such a statement about the cycling community and the shared passion and the connections we make. So back to last summer, I got a direct message out of the blue from Richie Barnes, MSK 65 in the Pyrenees, beautiful little property in this wonderful village in the Haute Pyrenees, Saint-Colin. And, he has a property that he rents. He rents it to cyclists. He rents it to hikers and skiers during the winter. He is a lifelong cyclist, a racer, is in the industry in so many different ways. And he reached out. He's like, I want to do some unique things. I don't just want to rent the property. I want to partner with a coach. I want to bring people in to have a certain type of experience. And he and I are very alike in that regard, that we're in an era where, cycling experiences and experience in general has always mattered, but it's what people crave right now. We are more connected, yet more alone as a society than we've ever been. And the opportunity to do things like this with other like-minded people is such a powerful experience. So he and I connected. We just mesh really well together as professionals and colleagues and now friends, that we put that very first trip together in September of 2024. And it was a massive, massive success. It was incredible. We just had this amazing group of people. We had a sold out full house. Everybody had a great experience. And that was sort of our proof of concept for we're onto something really great right here, because it's not just the climbing, it's the camaraderie. It's the dinners afterward and telling the story and the bantering at the amazing restaurant Chez Bruno in town. It's exactly what you'd expect from a rural, family-owned French restaurant. Beautiful,
amazing,
great food. It's not an overly formal place, but the food and the atmosphere is wonderful. And it's 200 meters from the house.
Wow.
Your bikes are all put away and clean for the day. You walk around the corner and you're there. So we had this great trip. And now we have a sold out women's week in early July. That's another hugely important niche. I mean, I have a wife who's a cyclist now, and obviously I've talked about my daughter. And so for me, making sure there are environments that are super welcoming and authentic for female cyclists is incredibly important. So
100%.
we partnered with somebody who's really helped us get going with that. And we've got an amazing trip there. The week after is our Tour de France week, because there's some amazing stages coming all within 20, 30K of the house. So the week after that is our Tour de France week, where we are not only riding the famous climbs, but we get to watch 2 stages. We're going to go to the mountain time trial on the Périgord, and then we get to watch the summit finish on the Super Bannière, which hasn't been used in the Tour de France in decades. So, I mean, we're parking a car on the side of the road days in advance. We're going to ride to the summit, come back. We'll have snacks. We'll have refreshments. So again, it's not just a climbing
pretty magical.
Experience.
Yeah,
So we'll have those. So for people who missed out on those this year, the women's and the Tour de France, we'll be running both those weeks next year in 2026. And then obviously the over 50 week is the 20th to 27th of July. And you hit the nail on the head. It's cyclists of all ages are wonderful, wonderful people. But again, I'm no calm hunter. I'm not hanging with a 23-year-old and their level of fitness. So I totally understand why the over 50 week, the initial response we've gotten to it has been overwhelming, where it is resonating with people. because they do want to be in an environment where they don't want to feel, not so much even feel bad about themselves, but they don't want to feel like they're holding up the group. They don't want to feel like they're straggling so far behind. They want to be with just people who are in the same space they are, where maybe this is something they did when they were younger and were suddenly like, well, I'll never get to do that again. No, you absolutely can do that again. Or maybe you were at a different phase in your life. Maybe you weren't even a cyclist yet, or you were busy completely in your full-time work and raising a family and you never got the chance to do this. And suddenly you're like, well, the time passed me by. No, it hasn't. Yes, maybe we're going to climb it a little bit slower. Who cares? It's that you versus you versus the mountain. A promise for anybody who's considering a trip like this, over 50 or even otherwise, there is no feeling like getting to the summit of these places. It does not matter how long it takes you. I promise you, you are going to have that overwhelming, just connected sense of accomplishment. I'll use the summit of the Col d'Aspin as an example. Obviously, so many of the climbs are in the Zone Pastoral, where it's just open for farm animals and grazing. I've never experienced anything like the stillness and the calmness of the top of the Col d'Aspin with the cowbells clanking
Magical.
slowly. It's, and I can describe it as best I can, but until you've experienced it, and you can get there. Yes, they're longer climbs. The thing about the Pyrenees, it's not the steepest place in the world. You can do this. Get the proper gearing on your bike. Give yourself that little bit of ability to spin. Okay, maybe you're not going to go quite as fast. Who cares? You get to the summit. We all descend together. This is how we run our trips. We all ride together in the valley. Nobody should be burning matchsticks or toasting powder in the valley anyway. We save it for the climbs. Everybody climbs at their own pace. It doesn't matter what week it is. It could be Women's Week, Tour de France week, over 50 week, and that gets back, Juliana, to that we all had different physiological characteristics. It makes no sense for two physiologically different climbers who both may be very accomplished and very good to try to tackle it at the same rate. And I'll dip a little bit back into the science here, because one of the things we haven't talked about that often gets overlooked are the subjects of repeatability and durability. They're both important and they can both be trained, but there is a genetic component to it. Me personally, my repeatability sucks. It's not an area of strength. It never has been. I've made it better relatively through training. I am not going to be somebody who can surge, recover. And when I'm talking about surge, I'm like putting yourself into the red and coming back, putting yourself into the red and coming back. I'm very slow twitch oriented. A cycler who has a little bit more of a sprinter's capability and fast twitch fibers can surge, recover. And this goes for the pros too. Yes, it's much narrower on a relative scale. Look at the difference between Tadej Pogačar and Jonas Vingegaard. Vingegaard, inevitably in a very short 500-600 meter effort, is going to get gapped a little bit by Pogačar. Tadej Pogačar has more of that repeatability. Geraint Thomas, one of the greatest all time to ever do this sport. You never see him, unless he absolutely has to, go. He's got to do the climb at his own pace. So if they have to do the climb at their own pace, I really think it's okay for the rest of us to do that.
That's
so we
true.
all
That's
go
a
at
good
our
point.
own. We all go at our own pace. We meet at the summit, assuming the weather's good. We're cheering for each other. It's high fives. It's fist bumps. We descend. Maybe we do it again if it's a 2-climb day. We go home. If we shower, we go out to eat and we celebrate. That's what it's all about.
Amazing. So you're there 7 days with different groups. Do people bring their own bikes or can they rent there? Okay.
Either is fine. You can bring your own. A lot of people are very particular. Again, I'm a perfect example. I got there with no bike because of Heathrow Airport. I was able to do bike hire. I had a Trekkimanda carbon frame disc, and I was good to go for a couple days. So it's about 15K from the house. It's not a big deal. But yeah, you can arrange in advance to do your own bike hire.
Wonderful. You touched a little bit on the gear. I still want to talk about the camp, but just because you touched on the gear, I just want to ask if you have any must-haves bike setup and gear considerations for efficient climb.
If you are, in general, a strong rider, it can be done on a typical 1130. I wouldn't recommend any lower than that, but there are a lot of bikes that come with 1130. And again, I was on an 1130 on my bike hire for a couple days. I'm picky. I think a lot of people in cycling are. And certainly as a cycling coach and someone who's a little higher cadence, I was picky, but I still managed it. I could have been on that bike the whole week and I would have been fine. For me, 1134 is better. So if you're someone who knows instinctively that a little bit of a higher cadence is going to be a benefit to you and a little bit of spinning, 1134. And if you're going to do bike hire, that's probably the best you're going to get. If you're like, I want to be sure, especially if you're someone who you can accomplish this, but you're sort of pushing the envelope. You can do it, but maybe it's your first time doing it. Maybe you are in that over 50 and I haven't done a lot of climbing like this in a while. You would want to make arrangements to certainly have your own bike and have it set up properly with a really qualified mechanic at a really good bike shop at home that's going to give you the gearing necessary. It could be as simple as just that little more 36 in the back. You could go crazy and have a dinner plate in the back and have an 1141. I certainly don't think anybody is going to need, that's an extreme. And people got to remember, the bigger you go, the more weight penalty you're getting. So it is a series of trade-offs. I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to getting past the 34 into the 36 and the 41. But you definitely, if you're someone considering a trip like this, whether it's with us or anybody else, and if you want to go above a 34, if you think that's necessary, have somebody who you trust as a bike fitter, a bike mechanic, and a shop that's going to be highly qualified to help you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's good to test out, obviously, and see how you feel on a climb and play with that, the difference between an 1130 or 1134. I do ultra cycling and there's a lot of climbing. And I just changed because my husband and I went to a race in Brazil where the climbs were so steep, so hard. I'd rather actually not as steep and long
same with me.
Sharp ones, but I have 1150.
Exactly. But if you're doing those ultra long distances, you got to be able to not torch yourself muscularly. And that's why all these options do exist. It can be very beneficial as an investment for some riders. There is no reason to stubbornly wear as a badge of honor, I'm only on an 1130, or I did this on an 1128 or something like that. Pride doesn't come into this. None of us are trying to win a stage race. Yeah, you can't have that weight penalty if you're that elite level of a cyclist and you're trying to stay on somebody's wheel. You're not going to use that. For the rest of us, it's not about what's right. It's about what's effective.
Absolutely. And that was effective for me, especially my knee. My knee was very thankful.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. Any piece of advice you would give any cyclist looking to improve their climbing?
Trust the work you have to put in lactate clearing capacity. And I use that terminology even though it's not something that you hear a lot, because that is the why behind Zone 2 training. Become a lactate clearing machine. And we all know what that feels like, or at least a great percentage of us do. When you have put in the work at Zone 2, you know what it feels like to go hard and be able to recover. Your heart rate comes down on a relative scale pretty quickly. Your legs feel better quickly. It's that subjective, how you feel on the road, that is the proof in the pudding when it comes to Zone 2 training and being able to clear lactate, because you can go. You can keep going. You know that as an ultra endurance cyclist, you're getting over climbs, you're refueling, you're like, I can go again, and those sorts of things. So it makes such a difference. So if I had to give one piece of advice, it's trust the science and become a lactate clearing machine.
Awesome. Wise words.
Thank you.
We just have to do the work now.
Yep, exactly.
And how can listeners follow you and find you both as a coach, and how can they find more information and join one of your camps?
Right. So they can find me in a number of different places. Instagram @ClimbWithJosh. So you can message me there. You can see I got tons of videos on coaching and lactate clearing and everything else. And obviously the information on our trips. I have a very basic website that's live and up and running, climbwithjosh.com. It has just a little quick spot on my coaching. It's got squares that sort of give the basics for all the trips, and then just the simplest of all forms to fill out to collect more information. We're all so busy. Nobody has time to sift through an enormous website and oodles of detail. Fill out the questionnaire. Give me your name, give me your email address and your WhatsApp number. If you want, my WhatsApp number's on there. People are free to reach me from all over the world. I do everything via WhatsApp. We have a wonderful PDF put together on the Over 50 week that gives a ton of detail, including the climbs and including the days we're doing which climbs and all the other details you could ever want to know. And if you're game, give me the verbal, Josh, I'm in. We'll get you invoiced. It is priced at a level that certainly it's an investment, but it's a manageable investment. And that's the beauty of the partnership that Richie and I have created. And now we're working with Saskia. We want this to be accessible to people. And so that's how you go about finding us. And we'd love to hear from as many of you as possible.
Amazing. I will put everything on the episode description.
Thank you.
And really excited about this episode. Thank you so much for sharing, because, I think climbing is something that you love or hate, or most people have to learn to love.
Yeah.
And I think if everyone listens to all the tips you shared here, I think you can start having a good relationship with the mountain.
I agree. And I'm Exhibit A. I had to learn to love it. And now there is nothing I'd rather do than be going uphill, and folks can get there.
Agree. Well, thank you so much, Josh.
My pleasure. Was happy to be here, Juliana. Thank you.
And that's all for today's episode. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. Your support means everything. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends.